Hello and welcome to the blindseyepodcast, the podcast discussing everything you did and didn't want to know about being blind. My name is Connor, and before we get into this week's topic, I just wanted to say thank you very much to everybody who's listened up to this point. I'm on my 20th episode as of right now, and I really didn't think I'd get this far, considering it was just an idea born out of lockdown and thought it might be a couple of episodes and something like that. And now, I'm 20 episodes in, and I really appreciate all the likes and the listens and the shares so far. So thank you very much to everybody who has, and hopefully it's been interesting and entertaining up until this point, and hopefully it continues to be. So to this week's topic. Today I'm going to talk about the blind community and the differences within the blind community, because there is a preconceived idea that there's a certain amount of agreeance or knowledge or familiarity between people who are blind, and some of that is true and some of that is not. So I thought it would be interesting to dive a little bit deeper into it, just to explain some of the different things going on, which some people may not have thought of or heard of before. Usual disclaimer, just my thoughts and opinions. And today I will actually explain why I give this disclaimer, because it is to do with this topic. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so when it comes to the blind community, quote unquote, the conceived idea or the preconceived idea is that you're blind. You must know everybody who's blind. You must all get along really well. You must all think the same way. You must have the same kind of politics, the same kind of approach to lots of different things. And I know that because I've had questions about it. I've had people say to me, I know this guy who's blind. Do you know him? Or you must know him. And it might be somebody who's an hour, 2 hours away from where I live. And it's that thing where I'm like, well, I don't know everybody who's blind. I'm like, there's a lot of people in the world who can't see. And yes, within Australia, the quote-unquote blind community is fairly small, but there's nothing particularly within it that means you must know everybody. And people have different levels of integration within that community. I mean, for myself, I tried my best until I started working to have almost nothing to do with the blind community, because I didn't like what that sounded like. I didn't like the idea that I was fraternizing with who I should be fraternizing with, like I was being boxed into a corner. And I eventually got over that idea, but for a while that was kind of what went through my head about, well, can't you just hang out with blind people, or can't you just do that kind of stuff? And my opinion was, well, that's not really the point, is it? So there's different levels of integration when it comes to some people. Some people are happy to do that, and some people don't want to do that. So there's a few reasons for all these kinds of differences. The first reason is really simple, that not everybody has the same kind of vision condition. Some vision conditions happen really rapidly, some happen really slowly, some are severe, some are mild. So from the offset, you have people with various different experiences. So there are some people who might not really need to use a cane all that much, and there are some people who needed to use a cane from day one. There are some people who went blind from birth, and there are some people who went blind later on in life. And all of these kinds of differences add up to different experiences, a different kind of it's a different kind of opinion builder, because based on developmental moments in your life, that will shape how you view things, no pun intended, and where your opinion lies, and what you think should be the case and what you think might not be the case, and all of these kinds of things. So they're the really big factors involved. The other big factor involved is your class and your background, because somebody who's working class or middle class might have a very different experience from somebody who was born into a wealthier family, just based on resources and what they had to do or struggle through. perhaps based on their culture, some cultures take a very different view to disabilities and these kinds of things than others. So in some cultures, it's seen as a curse on the family. It's seen as a retribution perhaps from God or something like that. And in others, it's seen as just more of a thing that needs to be overcome, but it doesn't really say anything particularly about the good or badness of the person or the family afflicted. Another really big difference is mainstream versus special needs kind of education. So in my own case, I was already in mainstream schooling. I was in year 7 when my vision started to go, and the school said, would it not be easier for me to go to a school for the blind or a special needs school? And we flat out rejected that because we thought, well, it'll be easier for you, the school, because I was the first blind student in the school. And I was kind of the opinion, well, I'm having to change enough here. I don't want to have to change any more than I need to. And if we supposedly live in a community that wants to integrate people, then get with the program. And in many ways, that made sure I had a uphill battle. But in hindsight, I'm kind of glad that I did that and I was that guinea pig, even though it was really bloody hard at the time. But then on the flip side, you have somebody who may have only gone to special schools or may have gone to a school that just had a bit of a better experience. I mean, not every school is the same as each other, even if they are mainstream schools. So all of these kinds of things shape your opinion and your experiences, because I know people, especially in school, I know people who went through school who are blind who didn't really receive much bullying and things like that, or received good teacher input and teaching. Whereas in many ways, I don't feel I did, and I don't feel my school was particularly prepared, and I received a lot of bullying. So right off the bat, that's a completely different outlook both of us would have. And I've met these people and, yes, we're blind, but that's really where the similarities stop in many ways. That kind of brings me nicely onto my disclaimer at the start of every show. And I do that because of what I call, sometimes cheekily referred to as the blind mafia. Because there are people who, like in any group, will say, that's wrong, that's not my experience, that's not how I do it, that's not what I think. And I don't like that you're making that generalized statement, and I don't want people to think that I think the same way as that person. So that's why I put that little disclaimer in, because there would be people who are out there who are blind or who are low vision who would say, Connor's opinion there is wrong, or that's not what I think, or that's not the way I live my life. So that's my little way of, I guess, letting anybody who's listening know that these are just my thoughts and my opinions, because I know there are things that I do that other people don't do. And in some cases, they might think I'm wrong. And in other cases, it's just a preference matter. But I put that out there because that's the world we live in, not just within the blindness community, but just the world we live in now, really, in any sense, that somebody feels, well, that's not the same as me, you don't speak for me. So that's basically why I put that disclaimer in, even though I hate to have to do it every week, but it's just a good way of anybody who's listening to say, look, chill out, just my thoughts. I'm not trying to speak for everybody, and trying to give everybody a bit of an idea of, just take it with a grain of salt. These are my thoughts. It's coming out of my mouth. Now, I can highlight some of these differences by some encounters I've had. So, to some people, there is the right kind of blind person. They have this idea that somebody who is blind must follow these steps, and if they don't, it's somehow bad, or it's a poor reflection on the rest of us or some bull crap like that. And I had that. I can think of a time when I think I was 13, and I had gone on my very first group outing with other kids who were blind. I think we were going rock climbing or something. And this guy started saying to me that I should have this. I should be able to do that by now. It's a disgrace that I don't. And he was only 15, but he was saying, you should learn Braille. The fact I should know Braille, the fact that I don't meant I was doing something wrong and that I was behind or that it was a disgrace. And I just disagree. But there are people out there who think like that. Similarly, there are other people who think if you're blind that it's reckless of you to be drunk or to go to a nightclub or be in a mosh pit. I've had people say to me, I would never put my friends in a situation like that they would have to be with me in a mosh pit or a nightclub. How dare you? That's really selfish of you. Whereas my friends have never said that to me. We've always had a bit of a plan. We've always worked it out. But I'm not going to change my life just because of what somebody else thinks. And that conversation has never been said to me by anybody actually involved. But it has been said to me by other people who are blind or low vision about what I should or shouldn't be doing or the way I should or shouldn't live my life because I'm blind. And I just think that's complete horseshit. Similarly with my cane, I had people say to me who are blind, who are maybe the same age or a few years older, I should be using the cane like this, or I should have a dog by now, and all of these kinds of things. But many of them had very different experiences to me. Some of them had been blind since birth, so the cane was all they knew, or Braille was all they knew, whereas I could see for 12 years, and then it was taken away from me. And in many cases, some of these people didn't really have issues with bullying or anything like that, whereas I did. So I didn't want to use a cane because I felt like it was painting a target on my back. So right off the bat, those simplified, you should be doing this arguments just really highlight the differences, because while the fact is that we both have vision issues, we're not the same people. We haven't had the same history. We don't have the same experiences. We haven't necessarily encountered all of the same things. And even if we have, we still might have drawn different conclusions to those things that have happened. I'll give you a controversial example, which is probably going to piss off some people who are blind who might listen to this, but there can be a tendency within the blind community for people to use the phrases blindies and sighties. And blindies obviously mean blind people, and sighties mean sighted people. So you might hear things like, I came across a sightie, or I hate when sighties do this. And I fucking hate this. I really hate this kind of talk with a passion. But other people, it's just really ingrained in them. They might only mostly socialize with other people who are blind, and they might have done that for most of their life. Whereas I haven't. I only really started socializing with blind people in my mid-20s en masse. So I have a completely different experience. But I hate this notion of having names, because in my mind, I'm like, look, we have enough shit that we have to try and overcome. We don't need to create these stupid barriers and names and in and out groups, because in my mind, it doesn't help anything. And, I don't like being referred to as something just because of my disability. So I think it's really hypocritical to be doing it on the flip side just because somebody can see. And there are a lot of people out there who are blind who would completely disagree with me on that, and that's just what they do. But I absolutely hate it. I pick up anybody who says it, because it just infuriates the shit out of me, because to me it's just completely hypocritical. So that's one instance of a really big difference between myself and others. And I know other people who are blind who think the same as me, that it's just a dumb thing. So there's one little aspect of difference, and, kind of giving away the secrets. So I'm sure the Mafia might come after me. So the last two things I will speak about are quite recent things that have come up. So some people listening may have heard discussions about actors in movies and TV and whether the actors should be from the backgrounds that they are portraying in whatever the set is. So the way this is kind of integrated into the blindness world, some people would say if you have a blind character that you're portraying, then that character should actually be blind. Now, I think this is a really oversimplified answer, and that's a current debate. You know, some people says if you're playing this, you should be getting somebody from that group. And I think while I like the idea of, you know, more representation and there needs to be more done about that, I also don't like the idea of just shoehorning somebody in because, you know, if I'm in a movie where I'm blind or I have to be Daredevil, that guy needs to see what's going on because it's make-believe. You know, I can't run down a street running over obstacles and blowing shit up and all this kind of stuff. Even though I'd love to be able to do it, I can't do that. So that person, while he might be playing a blind character, needs to be able to see. So in my opinion, it's all about context. And yes, there are some cases where it's just a laziness on behalf of whoever's producing these things. But in other cases, it's just based on what the plot demands. And so I don't particularly see that as controversial. You know, Ben Affleck, when he played Daredevil, needed to be able to see for what he was doing. That's just how it is, in my own opinion, and I don't think that's controversial. Now, I do think there are, in other cases, where it might be a bit more of a subdued kind of thing, that a subdued kind of movie or TV scene that you should try your best. And for me, I guess I come down on the opinion of, you know, as long as it's not science fiction or fantasy, try and just get the details right. So about the cane or the dog or how certain things work, or, not having to touch somebody's face to know who they are, so that the education that's getting out there is accurate. It's not this kind of bull. But in terms of the actual characters, I think this whole debate about it has to be this kind of person if it's that character is really missing the point on the context which might be involved. There's actually a really good TV show which I've just gotten into. It's called In the Dark, and it's about a blind protagonist. She's like a drunk. She's really sexually active. She goes around, and the accuracies of the character are really well done. So, somebody says to her, "Guess who it is?" And she says, the only people who like this game are sighted people. Or somebody says, "Do you want to feel my face?" And she's like, "No, I don't need to do that." And she has a phone that talks back to her. And so all the little kind of subtleties are accurate without making it, weird or too far-fetched or anything like that. And as far as I know, she's a sighted character. But for me, it tries to get that normalcy involved. And I just like the fact, she's a drunk and she's sexually active, because it also kind of shows the other side of things, that, just because you're blind or you have a disability doesn't mean you're an angel. You can still be a prick, and you can still be, into different things. You don't necessarily have to be an angel, but that's one example of where I think that kind of debate falls down, because just context matters. And finally, this brings me on to the whole idea, I guess, of this whole episode, was this idea of representing the blind community. I've had a few people say that to me over the years, and I just completely reject the notion. Just like, I'm white, so what I do doesn't reflect on the white community. I'm just a guy who happens to be blind. Anybody who tries to tell me what I do affects the rest of the blind community, I think, is missing the picture. And anybody who would look at me and said, "Connor's blind, Connor does this, that must mean the rest of the blind community thinks this way," is also an idiot, because the world is just not that simple. But I hate when people try and put you into that box of, you reflect poorly on the rest of us. I couldn't care less. live your own life. I really don't give a shit because it's just stupid in my book. I have blue eyes. Does that mean if I do something that every other person has blue eyes, I reflect badly on them? No. I just think it's a really oversimplified reaction to certain things. And as I say, anybody who would say, I had an encounter with Connor and he's blind, therefore other blind people must be like this or be like him or must think that, is also just as dumb, because we're individuals and we should be taken as individuals, disability or no disability. So anyway, that's the end of my little rant. But that was today's topic. I hope that was interesting. I've gotten a lot of questions about that over my years. So if you want to get into the show, get in touch with the show, as always, you can email blindseyepodcast@gmail.com. That's BLINDSEYE podcast@gmail.com. You can tweet the show at blindseyepod, and you can find the show on Facebook if you search for Blindseye Podcast. And I will speak to you next week. Cheers.